Alrighty, and we are back with episode 6 of Lore Equals Gameplay, and we're going to be reading the latest comlink Spectrum Dispatch thingy from CIG, and it's by a new author that CIG hired as part of the narrative lore team. His name is Jeremy Malul, and he actually super nice guy. He's been interacting with the community an awful lot since this came out. Actually, if you're here, you're probably already a fan of Paul Shelley, Astropub, Astro Historian. But he has actually been talking to him for quite a while since he got hired. I think like 5 months ago. You'd have to ask Paul because I was talking to Paul about it. It's pretty cool. But a lot of what Paul this guy did his homework on the Tavaran before writing this story, like, and I guarantee you he has been watching Paul's lore stuff, as well as paying attention to what Jail, who is basically the expert on all things Xenos in Star Citizen, paying attention to what he has to say, because what he writes is really spot on as far as being influenced by the lore that we already have surrounding the Tavaran. And if you've been with me from watching the Galactopedia update that we just did for episode 5, we talked about the Branagh system and the Tavaran diaspora there. And if you've read the other lore articles, like I think it's Far From Home, I think is what it's called, with the Tavaran and his family, who they left Aramis and the Vega system and moved to Branagh, and then moved back because they didn't like it. This bit called Crossroads is really well informed, and Jeremy did a fantastic job. And actually, so what I'm going to do is, let's see, Twitter. Let's go to my Twitter because I follow him, and how do I search? Let's see, Jared. That was right at the top. There we go. So here he is. It's at Jeremy, common spelling, Melloul, same as in the lore article. And his pinned tweet is from him getting hired back in June, but he also recently tweeted, from when he when he first shared the story. He's just a super good guy. So go and give him a follow. Maybe he's going to be sharing some more insights about the lore writings with us, and just to let him know what you think. But let's go ahead and get to reading this. Cool imagery too, because it shows the as of yet unimplemented ejection of the Talon's cockpit from the body of the Talon itself. So, it was a fast descent to an early grave, in what seemed to be an appropriate location too, a large scrapyard full of derelict ships and industrial equipment that had likely been picked clean long ago, or was left too unstable to be safely or profitably salvaged. Now there would be one more ship in this graveyard. Kren's Talon smoldered and sparked as clouds raced by his field of view. All sorts of alarms were yelling at him, as if he wasn't already aware of the danger he was in. The Tavaran pirate tried to wrestle his ship into control, but he could do nothing to slow his fall. With no better solution available to him, and as much as he didn't want to abandon his cargo, he decided to abandon ship. As he ejected the pod, his console lit up with warnings. The cockpit of the Talon was supposed to separate from the rest of the vessel, but the damage to his ship had impacted the latches. They didn't detach properly, but the cockpit tried to fire anyway. The force of the ejection ripped the latches out of place and sent his cockpit spinning wildly. Kren only caught glimpses of the rest of his ship hurtling deeper into the field of scrap as his cockpit crashed through piles of loose metal. Hitting the ground, he tumbled end over end before finally coming to a stop, seated upside down. The pirate caught his breath and ripped his helmet off, letting it fall to the ground. His skull stung as air touched the freshly bleeding wound upon his head. His cockpit was in tatters, the canopy shattered, and the walls pierced in multiple places by loose scrap. Worst of all, a large piece of shrapnel was embedded in his left thigh, pinning him to his seat. Kren slowly gripped the shard of metal and wrenched it free. Immediately, blood began flowing from the wound, spilling down into his cockpit. He tossed the shard of metal aside and tried to detach his seat straps, but they refused to disengage. Frustrated, he reached behind his seat and pulled the bakor from its lodging. The bakor was about the size of a hatchet, but instead of a single axe head, the weapon had 3 edges: the standard axe head and then a small fluke jutting out opposite the main blade, as well as a short, sharpened spike extending from the top of the weapon between the 2 blades. It was uncommon, but the traditional Tavaran weapon was the pirate's favorite tool. And I forget the name. It was like it's like a shortened version of like a poleaxe, I think, is what some people were comparing it to. And I think Jeremy mentioned that was the inspiration for it. I may be referring to the wrong thing. I'm not sure. I forgot the conversation, but it was pretty interesting that he took inspiration from something that exists. Kren cut the seat straps away and fell to the ceiling of his cockpit, wincing as his wounded leg screamed at him. He looked at the injury, still pulsing blood, and then cut his seat straps again, using the material to fashion a makeshift tourniquet, which he tied around his leg to staunch the bleeding. Immediate death now held temporarily at bay, he pulled himself out of the shattered remains of his cockpit and into the dumping ground around him. For as many fights as he'd been in before, the pirate was sure he'd never looked this bad. He sheathed his bakor in the holster at his waist. The sound of the ship's engines, distant but growing closer, sent Kren's adrenaline spiking. He ducked out of his sight. The bounty hunter was coming. The hunter's approach stirred a strong wind that carried through the junkyard, eliciting a chorus of groaning metal in response as the unstable ships throughout teetered, threatening to topple over. Kren watched the Avenger pass over him and head towards a plume of smoke that was slowly rising into the sky. His crashed ship. Where, hopefully, his cargo remained. That cargo was the whole reason he had gotten into this mess. Infiltrating the security post hadn't been any more difficult than usual, but after that everything had gone to hell. Not only had his exit been bloodier than planned, but then Jorg Tala, that damn bounty hunter, had come out of nowhere, isolated Kren from his crew, and sent him crashing down here. So he talked about infiltrating a security post. What security post do we have in game right now? Security Post Korea. And so obviously we know that with the revamped Security Post Korea that you'll be able to attack it, potentially infiltrate it in order to secure drugs. But I guarantee you that in the future there will be other things and other reasons to infiltrate and attack security outposts, whether it's in Stanton or elsewhere. Maybe a pirate or a criminal is being held there, and you have, either they're part of your human crew. It's a human person. They didn't want to, they don't want to go to prison. They don't want to get shipped off to Klesher or Quarterdeck, and that's where they got dropped off. Because we know that bounty hunters will be dropping off bounties at physical locations in the future. But maybe there would be valuable cargo, valuable things, that are, smuggled or stolen, that are held at these stations. And if you, get the information that they're there, it might be worth going after. We're probably going to be seeing the first inklings of that soon. But there's going to be a bunch of reasons to, if you're on the wrong side of the law, to either infiltrate security facilities or attack them outright. And it'll be up to you how you choose to go about it, based off what the job is. Think back to last year's CitizenCon with the Hadesian artifact, but instead of a outpost out in the middle of nowhere in Pyro, a security facility, maybe in Stanton, maybe somewhere else. Let's see, where were we? And then, of course, if you are, if you're caught doing it, if there's, somebody, sends the alarm, it's going to generate a, you're going to be have a crime attached to you, and there's going to be bounties generated on your head. And not only will law enforcement security personnel be tracking you down, but there will be bounty hunters coming after you, just like in this story. Jorg had been systematically hunting down members of the Ashen Haunt for the last few months, but Kren hadn't thought he'd become this much of a problem. Based on the fanatical way Jorg was targeting his gang, he had no doubt the hunter was another xenophobe trying to relive humanity's glory days, triumphing over an alien species. The pirate watched as the bounty hunters, and so this just is basically telling you straight up that the Ashen Haunt is a Tavaran gang, a Tavaran pirate crew. The pirate watched as the bounty hunter's ship descended out of view, landing near the smoke. The hunter would undoubtedly investigate his talent's crash site, and Kren was determined to not let that bastard get his hands on what he had worked so hard to steal. In a way, Kren figured he was lucky. Were their roles reversed, Kren would have fired a missile at the wreck as soon as he had it in sight. That lack of decisiveness on the bounty hunter's part was a distinctly human quality. The pirate took stock of his situation. A pistol more than halfway through its last battery, a single grenade that managed to not blow up when he crashed, his Bakor blade, or Bakor, and most importantly, that nasty gash in his leg. The tourniquet was slowing his blood loss, but he needed a more permanent solution. Adrenaline would keep the pain at bay for now, but he wouldn't stand a chance if he bled out or lost circulation in his leg. So, that is Jeremy doing a really good job talking about actor status effects, and how we already have it in a basic implementation with medical gameplay and actor status tier 1, where you can bleed out. But it's definitely going to get more refined and more intuitive in that you'll have an injury to the leg, you'll know based off the injury, you'll have a time to bleed out, and based off what you do. Either time to bleed out or time to where the leg is no longer functional for whatever reason. Based off what you do is what will either stop that timer or prolong that timer, and may have an effect on what type of injury you end up receiving after you receive some sort of medical care. So I fully expect that Star Citizen will have a pretty diegetic medical system. In that if you have, and I'm expecting that it'll be integrated with your armor and your suits, in that you'll be able to, not only provide medications via med pens, via the med gun, and med gun lasers are dumb. Like, I guarantee you that's a temporary, system, that they got in order to get it working and test it all out. But eventually, with the way they want to build suits and armor, I expect that to be a animation where you use the gun, you select what you're going to be injecting, or it automatically tells you, but it's less accurate, what have you, and then you press it up against an injection port in the armor or in the suit in order to inject what you need to do to provide the treatment. Because the idea that you're using a medical laser to somehow beam through armor and a suit is just too much suspension of belief for me, especially with how diegetic and immersive Star Citizen is going to be. I don't foresee every other FPS game, every other FPS shooter having a more detailed medical system than Star Citizen. Especially because you have to jab the med pen through something. It would make more sense that if you had, that in the future your suit, automatically creates a port into your vein, and so that way you can inject something into your suit or into your armor that goes directly into circulation. That would be the medical way to do it. I say this because I'm a career critical care flight paramedic, both civilian and Army. That's the way I would have designed the system. It's not that hard, to just create an animation that interacts with a set point on the armor or the suit. Surely in 900 years we would be able to get a tiny needle through an inch of advanced metal plating. I don't know. I'm just saying it would make more sense if you maintain the integrity and you had the system built into the suit. If your suit can tell you where your injury is, or what's wrong or where you're hit, You would think it would, it can scan the environment around you. It has a heads-up display and computers built in. It has you have suits that have thrusters, etc., in order to help you navigate EVA. I guarantee you, for suits rated for combat and maybe even not rated for combat, that they'll have medical stuff implemented in them. And maybe you'll have ones that aren't. It'll it's a great way to incorporate choice. Do you buy the suit that provides you more protection, but doesn't have an integrated medical system, or do you buy the suit that doesn't have the integrated medical system but instead trades it for the thruster system, so that way you can EVA? It all depends on what you're going to be doing and what sort of risk you expect to have. But I would also hope that they make it so you have rudimentary systems, so that way you're not up a creek without a paddle. Because it would really suck if you have a damaged leg, and okay, you don't have the armor or suit system that has the built-in tourniquet system where you're like, I got shot in the leg, and you press the button on your HUD and it self-tourniquets your leg. Like, that's a super sci-fi trope. But if you can't grab the tourniquet off your kit or out of your backpack and apply it, or bandage and apply it, that would really suck too. Like, it shouldn't be an all or nothing thing. It should be this is better and you can choose this, but this is still available to you. This is cheap, and everywhere you can find it. That's enough about medical gameplay. That's a rant for another day. But it's cool that it talks about him using making a modified tourniquet with his seatbelt, and that he's thinking about, okay, this is I'm not going to bleed out right now, but if I don't do something about this, so I can take off this tourniquet and keep moving, because if you have a tourniquet on a limb, you're going to lose full circulation really quickly, and that limb isn't going to be usable. Tourniquets fucking hurt. So yeah, the fact that he wrote that in, and the character's thinking about, okay, how do I fix this, in a jank way to get back in the fight. I think that's really cool writing. It isn't just I'm just gonna push on through it. No, you got impaled. But yeah, so Kren searched the scrap around him, then limped his way down the small dirty alleys that weave through between the forgotten ships until he found what he was looking for. A large freighter sat up ahead. It looked to be a more recent addition to the wreckages here, relatively speaking. The ship's hull had been ripped away, exposing a large set of pipes from its inner workings to the open air. Pipes that were slowly leaking green fluid. Someone's resource management wasn't very good, and now their resources are leaking out. The pipe system? Obviously, he's not referring to that specifically, but that's kind of cool that, he's mentioning that, there's pipes and there's fluid leaking out. Kren searched the scrap around him, then limped his way down the... Oh, wait, here we go, sorry. Kren entered the ship through the hole in the hull, followed the pipes to their natural point, and, jackpot, found a large coolant tank. He smirked, knowing exactly how proud Ragwheel would be when he heard his story. It was proof that Kren actually listened to the old mechanic, even when he pretended not to. So he found a tank full of coolant, which is one of the things that we're going to be managing as part of resource management. If your ship takes damage and the pipes that move the coolant around your different components to keep them cool takes damage, you'll have to reroute coolant from your coolers, where it's stored, to the places where it needs to go to keep those components cool, like your power plant, your quantum drive, thrusters and such weapons. But he's just talking about how he remembered that the mechanic told him that this is a coolant tank, these are the lines that go through to it, and this is where the coolant is stored. So it's just a nod to that gameplay. Kren took a deep breath and drew the Bakor. He was about to make a lot of noise, but he needed to get this done. If Jorg heard him, then so be it. Kren stabbed the Bakor's center spike into the tank. The metal shrieked in protest at the impact, but sadly remained intact. Kren adjusted his grip and struck with greater strength. He was rewarded with a stream of green fluid pouring from the fresh hole. With no time to lose, Kren steeled himself and pushed his leg forward into the path of the liquid. Ugh. Ow! It took every shred of willpower he had to force himself to remain where he stood, gritting through the pain until the caustic chemicals burned his wound, cauterizing it. That's gnarly. Burns from caustics are far worse than burns from acids. Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine. That's one tough Tavaran. Then he had to turn his leg and burn the other side where the scrap had pierced through. So he is literally like letting a caustic substance burn his flesh and get like within, outside and inside his leg in order to cauterize the whole wound and stop the bleeding. So that way he can take the tourniquet off and not bleed out, but also still retain use of the leg. When the wound was sealed, Kren yanked his leg from the chemical and buckled on the spot. The sickening metallic scent of his blood melded with the acrid sting of the coolant, making his head swim. Looking down at the ruined flesh of his leg, he wasn't sure he'd ever walk the same, but at least he had stopped the bleeding. Limping heavily, Kren exited the freighter the same way he came and found the smoke trail of his ship, which he used as a guiding star as he continued deeper into the scrapyard. So, there's no way we can know without asking Jeremy. Is he specifically talking about actor status stuff? And I think he is, just because of how accurately he's describing how it works, even in a basic way now, but how it'll work more in the future. So he has treated his wound. He is not going to die. He has stopped the bleeding out timer, but obviously the wound is still there, and he can't heal the wound. He doesn't have the ability to heal it. And in the future, I fully imagine that, when you take wounds like that, you won't be able to, you're not going to heal them with the med gun. The med gun is simply injecting medicine into you. It's not magical healing gel. We don't have Bacta in Star Citizen. And so you'll be able to treat your injuries, inject yourself with Hemazol in order to basically, replace lost blood. Be able to treat pain in order to blunt the pain stimulus, so that way you can sort of ignore your injury. But if you don't have those things available to you, you're going to be walking around limping. And if you use them incorrectly, you'll have other actor status effects. We know this. He is writing this story with the actor status and medical system in mind, both what we have currently and how it'll end up working in the future. It's just really cool. It's really informed writing. Let's see. Limping heavily, Kren exited the freighter the same way he came and found the smoke trail of his ship, which he used as a guiding star as he continued deeper into the scrapyard. The collection of shattered ships, say that 5 times fast, grew messier the deeper he ventured. More and more the paths dead-ended into mounds of rusted metal. Unwilling to risk the noise he'd make clambering over the scrap, he blindly continued through whatever paths he could find, taking a circuitous route towards his ship. He kept his steps as light as he could with his injury, but despite his efforts, it proved impossible to be totally silent. So that's a really good way of saying that you're not going to be able to sneak. There are some things that you're not going to be able to do when injured. If you remember back to CitizenCon, where they showed us the mantling system, I can imagine that when you are injured, if you have injuries, to your arms and legs, you're not going to be, we already know that it makes it difficult for you to walk and all that. They're going to take that further and make it so that way, if you were trying to hide, because they showed us the NPCs searching for you, you might not be able to engage the slow stealthy mode. You might not be able to walk in a way that makes less noise, or your baseline walking makes more noise, and so it might give you up. It proved impossible to be totally silent. The proof? A bullet ripped through his shoulder. The sudden impact dropped him behind a heavy sheet of metal. A burst of additional gunfire followed, and impacted centimeters in front of his face against the impromptu cover. Clearly, Jorg had found him. The fact he had found him so quickly did at least give the pirate hope about one thing. Maybe his cargo was still safe. "Kren," the bounty hunter called out. He sounded far away. "Time to give it up. It's over." Kren pushed himself against the metal plate and put his hand on his shoulder. Thankfully, the bullet had pierced through completely and seemed to have avoided causing any major damage. As the chant says, do not let misfortune distract from your blessings. That's interesting, mentioning chants as if, talking about, it might be like a chant from the Rajora. Something that practitioners of the Rajora do is they do ritual chants. Again, actor status stuff. Depending on where you get shot, maybe it creates a minor injury. That you don't need to treat. It's a distraction, but it isn't going to start the timer for bleed out. He peeked out from behind his cover and caught a glimpse of Jorg wearing a green set of heavy armor. He was perched atop the remains of a carrack, using the vantage point to great effect. Even from this distance, Kren could spot a laser pistol on the bounty hunter's hip, along with what he thought might be a knife, as well as the assault rifle to blame for his latest injury. "Come on!" Kren shouted, trying to not to sound too winded. He glanced around for a good escape route. "You should know by now that I'm not really the come quiet type." Kren took off, careful to stay low and keep as much cover as he could between himself and the hunter. Maintaining a crouch stance proved even more difficult thanks to his mounting injuries. So, again, actor status. You've gotten, impaled in the leg. You've gotten shot in the shoulder. You might not be able, maybe it will prevent you from crawling. Maybe, you can't get down into a crouch. You have to stand and hobble. It might force you into certain movements that you can't do anything about until you either get treatment, or are healed. Kren took off, careful to stay low and keep as much cover. Oh, wait, sorry. "If you give up, I can get you medical attention," Jorg replied from his perch. "I'd rather you not die if I can avoid it." "Doesn't seem like you're trying very hard." "The bounty for capturing you alive is higher than turning you in dead," Jorg said, "but not by much. The Haunt doesn't have many friends." So he's telling us, again, that the UEE wants their bounties brought in alive because we have regeneration. If you bring them in dead, there's a good chance that they have an imprint somewhere and they just regenerated, and that they'll be able to, come back to committing crime, and you've only deterred them for a short period. So obviously, bounty hunters want to capture you alive and bring you in warm. Kren ignored him, continuing to move on until he found himself at an impasse. There were two routes available to him. One was over a hill of scrap, but attempting to climb it in his current state was sure to draw Jorg's attention. The other was through a clearing, and would leave him an easy target. Kren carefully pulled a loose length of pipe from the scrap and peeked at Jorg. The hunter was looking down the sights of his rifle, searching for any sign of movement. As soon as the Jorg's head was turned away, Kren tossed the pipe as far as he could. The sound of metal hitting metal drew Jorg's attention, and Kren used the momentary distraction to step out of hiding, draw his laser pistol, and unload the last of his battery at the carriage Jorg was standing on. The shots found their target, and with no small amount of luck, the carrack collapsed, the tower of a ship falling in on itself, consuming Jorg within it. His battery empty, Kren tossed his blaster aside and ran across the open space as fast as his injured leg allowed. It wasn't fast enough. A cacophony of metal from behind him drew his gaze, and Kren turned to see Jorg pushing out of the remains of the fallen ship. He seemed to have lost his rifle in the fall, but was otherwise unharmed. His armor only scuffed and scratched from the fall. Kren cursed. He'd stand no chance against Jorg until that damn armor was dealt with. Jorg drew his pistol and shot at Kren, but the injured pirate managed to just make it to the other end of the clearing, breaking Jorg's line of sight. Kren was sure that he'd never outpace the hunter in a straight chase, so he quickly dislodged the debris he ran past, creating an avalanche of trash behind him. Soon a jagged obstacle course of metal shards lay between them. "You really think you can get away?" Jorg called out, more annoyed than anything. He charged ahead, vaulting over and under the debris. "You're going down, just like the rest of your pitiful gang," Jorg taunted. Spotting an opportunity ahead, Kren slowed just enough to make sure Jorg saw him. "You think you're so much better than us? Must be easy for you, only seeing the verse in black and white." Jorg raised his pistol to fire, but Kren ducked around a corner again, just barely escaping him. Jorg followed, gaining speed, and rounded the boom! The old grenade around the corner trick. It wasn't the first time Kren had used the tactic, and he hoped this wouldn't be the last time either. As the chant goes, hunger can make even the most dangerous predator blind. Again, another Rajoran chant. Unwilling to give Jorg even a moment to recover, Jen drew his Bakor and rushed into the dirt cloud kicked up by the grenade's detonation. As the dust began to dissipate, Kren saw the hunter already regaining his footing. The blast had done its job, though. Jorg's armor was now charred and heavily damaged. The pirate swung his Bakor at the hunter's pistol first, knocking the weapon aside and followed by raking the axe towards Jorg's head. Kren's aim was true, but the deadly blade didn't quite penetrate Jorg's armor, though the force of the swing sent the hunter stumbling back. Kren immediately went for Jorg's fallen pistol, turned it towards the hunter, but froze before he could finish squeezing the trigger. Where his axe had struck Jorg's helmet, the visor had cracked, revealing the face beneath. A Tavaran face. "Not what you expected to see," Jorg laughed, still held at gunpoint. Why? You could be hunting anybody else, but you're going after us? After your own kind?" Kren felt his blood boiling, anger surging within him like a tidal wave. "Working for the bastards who took everything from us? The humans need to see that we're worthy of respect. And this is how? By having us hunt each other down? You and your gang are holding our entire people back," Jorg replied, with deadly conviction. Pardon me. It's hard on my voice, trying to voice act. Kren didn't know what to say. How could a Tavaran believe this, after their people had endured so much, suffered so much, and here? A flash of movement snapped Kren back to the present. A thrown knife cut through the air, aimed at his throat. Kren barely dodged it, the knife drawing blood as it grazed him. Then Jorg charged him. Kren stumbled back, fighting to bring the pistol to bear, but Jorg slammed Kren's wrist against the hull, breaking the pirate's grip on the pistol. The weapon fell at their feet, but Kren kicked the pistol with the heel of his foot before Jorg could reach it, hearing it clang as it disappeared under a large pile of scrap. With the inch of space he had gained, Kren swung his axe down, but the hunter leapt away to avoid being cut by the blade. Kren pressed forward, swinging the axe again and again. Seconds stretched on, and Kren's stamina began to give out as the fight continued. Any strength advantage Kren might have had was quickly being sapped by his blood loss, and as much as the pirate hated to admit it, Jorg was clearly better trained. If Kren was going to defeat the hunter, he needed to end things soon. So, remember how Chris Roberts and I always forget that developer's name. They talked about the skills system, and one way, in way we might get skills and get skills developed is increasing your character's stamina. And so you might be able to do things in a certain way, and hopefully not be able to, gamify it and do it repeatedly, so that way you increase your character's stamina. But that stamina can definitely be affected by your injury, and so not only will you, not be able to do certain movements or run, run as fast, but you also might have your stamina affected, so that way, your ability to run as far as distance or engage in melee combat for a longer period, it might affect your swings and your blocks and jabs, those sorts of things. Those are easy things for game designers to incorporate, using a skill type system, and tying it into the actor status system is not something that is complicated at all. So I fully expect that we're going to see that in the future. So, training and dedicating yourself to a certain profession and certain tasks will have benefits, but those benefits can definitely be mitigated by injury. So yeah. Second, let's see. Any strength advantage Kren might have had was quickly being sapped by his blood loss, and as much as the pirate hated to admit it, Jorg was clearly better trained. If Kren was going to defeat the hunter, he needed to end things soon. Kren let loose a guttural roar and raised his bakor high, ready to smash down into the hunter. Jorg reached for the axe and Kren grinned. The feint worked. He redirected the spike of the bakor into Jorg's leg, stabbing it through a gap in the armor left by the grenade explosion. Jorg fell where he stood, crumpling over the injured leg. The pirate had the hunter at his mercy, and yet did nothing. For as much as Kren hated Jorg for hunting down his pack, he was still Tavarin. Jorg tried to push himself up, but his leg couldn't hold his weight, and he fell right back down. Bakor pointed at Jorg. Kren spoke. I'll give you a chance, but just one, he began. Don't ever come after me again. Kren turned. He heard Jorg struggle after him and then collapse again, unable to pursue him. Kren tried to come to terms with his new understanding of Jorg when he finally reached the end of the smoke he had been following all this time. There he found what he was looking for, his talon, and just beyond it, Jorg's Avenger. Kren's own ship was wrecked, already at home in the landfill of scrap metal, but at least it seemed his smuggling compartment hadn't been compromised. He used his bakor as a pry bar, snapping it into a gap between his ship's engine plating, and began to push. It didn't give immediately, but with enough force, the leverage did its trick. Kren pried the plating away, revealing his ship's engines. Sitting amidst all the inner workings was a hidden compartment. Inside there was a small, reinforced chest, only a little larger than his hand. Kren breathed a sigh of relief and carefully removed the chest from its position. A pipe struck the back of his head and sent him, the cargo, and the bakor sprawling to the ground. I was wondering where you were trying to go, Jorg said. I thought you wanted my ship, but... Vision blurry, Kren watched as Jorg bent down and picked up the small chest. This is what you got from the security outpost? Jorg asked. The reason so many people there had to die? Kren groaned, Vision still swimming. They were in the way, he said, voice uneven. That's it? Asked Jorg. He tossed his pipe aside and retrieved Kren's fallen bakor. Do you know what happens with every crime you pull? Jorg waited for an answer. When none came, he continued. You validate all the terrible ways they treat us. Reinforce their belief that we're just problems that need solving. And you blame us for that? Kren asked, incredulous, trying to speak through the pain. They leave no room for us in their world. We have nothing to lose by fighting back. We have our future, Jorg said. Our lives. You call this a life? Kren asked, frustration, anger, and sadness all raging within him. All their systems, all their laws, they're designed to keep us weak. And you know what happens if we do show the humans any signs of strength? They call us criminals, convince the universe we're somehow a threat to be hunted, when all we want to do is survive. Well, fine, I welcome it. If they want me to be a criminal, I'll be the best one I can be. I'll show them exactly what our people are capable of. What's in there? Jorg held the box up in between them. What's worth all that misery? See for yourself. The code is 2610. Kren watched Jorg's expression carefully as the hunter entered the code and unlocked the box. If he recognized the number, he gave no sign of it. Jorg opened the lid and immediately his brows furrowed, clearly confused. 2610 is the year that the Tavarin surrendered after the first Tavarin War. Yeah. Let's see. Tavarin War. Star Citizen. Second one. Yeah. 2610. June 24th, 2610 is the end of the Second Tavarin War. Let's see. He reached inside the box. What is this? Jorg asked, holding up the data stick that had been kept secure in the small shielded chest. Lives, Kren said. I don't understand, Jorg said. They're fresh starts, clean identifications used to smuggle Tavarin off-world. Kren clarified. From places they wouldn't be allowed to travel for whatever bullshit reasons the local governments use to mark them as criminals. As the silence between them settled between them, Kren saw a crack in Jorg's expression. He pressed his advantage. All this time, you've been hunting me and the others in the haunt, but we haven't been stealing for ourselves. We've been stealing for this. Where do you take them? Jorg finally asked. To Branagh. And if you're still with me from when we did the Galactopedia update using the Arc Star map, we went over the Branagh system. And the Branagh system is on the far sort of northwestern corner, northwestern edge of the Galactic Star map. And it's way out in the middle of nowhere. It's only accessed by one jump point, but it's where the Tavaran diaspora live. Tavaran who don't want to live in the UAE, they go to Branagh to live, as well as other non-UAE claim systems. But there's a significant Tavaran community and colony on Branagh too, as well as Tavaran living within the asteroid belt in the Branagh system. And so basically the Ashen Haunt steals fake IDs, fake passports, paperwork, whatever, in order to get to Tavaran, off-world of planets where they're maybe in order to travel, in order to go through official travel and maybe leave certain planets, you probably need to have a clean criminal record. Maybe even have citizenship in some instances. We don't know what the regulations and restrictions are, but in order to get these Tavaran off planets where they've been marked as criminals, they have to have clean documentation. And so they get them off the planet, and then they essentially smuggle them to Branagh, where they're outside the reach of the UE. The pirate saw the realization on the hunter's face. Outside the Empire. Kren just smiled. The Empire knows what we're doing. I may hate them, but they aren't stupid. Why do you think our bounties are so high? They can't stand to see Tavaran help each other. There are other ways, Jorg replied, voice more unsteady than it had been. You don't have to murder to save others. We do the only thing we can. If some humans have to die to save my people, then so be it. That's not... Jorg started. Those aren't soldiers on the stations you attack. They're innocent people. You're not fighting a war. Of course I am. The thunder of ship engines pierced the atmosphere as Kren's crew exited Quantum over the scrapyard. They had finally tracked him down. Jorg's surprise at their entry gave Kren just the opportunity he needed. He charged at Jorg and threw all his weight into the hunter, taking advantage of every pound he had over the smaller Tavaran. He pushed and pushed until Jorg took a sharp breath. Kren stopped and saw that Jorg's chest was shaking. His breathing pained. A metal rod was sticking out through his chest, slick with blood. Kren stepped back from the bounty hunter. His hoarse breaths rose and fell. Still clutching the Bakor, he looked down at the wound, the shock clearly holding the pain at bay for the time being. Well, he managed in a ragged whisper. Definitely not worth the extra credits. Kren watched him for a few moments. The hatred that had driven him to this point was surprisingly softened. The humans, Kren started. Why do you care about them so much? For a moment, Kren wasn't sure Jorg would answer. Then the hunter closed his eyes, grimacing in pain. They're not all the same. Kren searched Jorg's expression for something that wasn't there. That's not what I asked. Why do you care? The pause was longer this time. Jorg's breathing slower. When I was young, I was alone, he said. A human took me in, showed me another way. They could be our allies if you didn't treat them all like enemies. Jorg's words spun in Kren's mind. The sheer conviction with which Jorg spoke troubled him. You had your imprint scanned recently? He asked. Jorg nodded. There was a slight movement. To Kren, it seemed all he could manage. Then, Kren said, maybe you can tell me about it when we meet again. The words took time to land, but when they did, Kren registered the surprise on Jorg's face. Fine. Next time, Jorg said, weak, his eyes closing. Kren nodded and stayed there, watching as Jorg Tala died. Kren retrieved his Bakor and gave the hunter one last look. He knew Jorg would be back. One of the benefits of the lawful life was an easier time regenerating. Well, easier in that you wouldn't be arrested right when you woke up. The headaches were the same no matter what. Kren caught himself hoping Jorg's regeneration was painless and stopped mid-thought, surprised by his own sentimentality. So, if you are a unlawful player, you won't be able to go to Brentworth Care Center on New Babbage and set your imprint there, obviously. You know, if you have a criminal record, you know, they're going to recognize you. You're going to be arrested. If you are unlawful and then, you know, you have your imprint set at Brentworth Care Center, if you're a lawful player, and then you commit a crime and you are killed in the process, or you are killed later on while you still have a criminal record, you will regenerate back at Brentworth, unless you re-imprint somewhere else, and you'll be arrested. You know, as soon as you won't be able to wake up and just run away. The regeneration is going to have a sort of convalescence period, just like healing from severe injuries, where you will have actor status debuffs and effects that will take time to wear off. And sure, you'll probably be able to do things to make that time go faster, like resting in the bed. That's why that there are extra beds in the Carrick's med bay, as I guarantee you those are for recuperation post having been healed, not regenerating. You're not going to regen on a tier 2 bed. Promise. Guarantee it. Get used to it now. But those will, when you regen at a hospital, if you rest in the bed for a little while, I imagine it'll make it so that way your convalescence period is shorter. You know, those actor status effects get away sooner. Or you can hop right out of bed and run off, but you'll have, you know, you'll be dizzy, you'll be unsteady, you'll be weak, you know, and those, you know, depending on, you know, what sort of injuries you had, and the quality of the regeneration bed that you regenerate at, those could, you know, be, you know, more or less debilitating and last, you know, a longer or shorter period of time. But I bet you'll be able to counter those with certain medications, at least to some extent. So there's a lot of cost benefit, you know, to it. There's a lot of choice to it. If you're a criminal player, you're only gonna be able to set your imprint, you know, easily at places where, you know, the places where there are criminal medical beds of a high enough level, with an Ibrahim sphere and a regen bed. You know, maybe at Ruin Station. You know, we assume that Ruin Station will have one. Maybe not. But they'll be few and far between. If you look at the Arc Star map, and here, let's we'll pull it back up, and not what I wanted. We're just going to look at the number and placement of the unclaimed systems that we know are very unlawful, you know, pirate havens. So we don't know where this fight just occurred in Crossroads, but we know that Kren is trying to help smuggle Tavarin to the Branagh system here. You know, it's a unclaimed system, and not all unclaimed systems have, you know, just massive amounts of pirate activity. You know, it varies. You know, you really have to read the lore to know, you know, which systems have more or less pirate activity. You know, it just means that the UEE doesn't claim that system, and then they don't maintain a significant presence there. But like we know, Pyro is a, you know, pirate system, very unlawful, very dangerous. We know Nyx has lots of smuggling activity. There are pirates there, but it's not as cutthroat as Pyro. But then Odin was recently claimed by the UEE, but there are pirates there, but they probably don't have, you know, those pirates probably don't have a station with a you know, tier 1 bed. You know, Null is way over here, you know, from Nyx. That's, you know, 3 jumps, and Null is a huge star system. The landing zone on Ashana, the Olympus, which is a crash carrier, that probably has a tier 1 bed on it. But if you are killed as a pirate raiding Bremen, and you set your imprint way back here in Null, you're going to lose an awful lot of progress. You're going to be a long way away from wherever you're shipping your gear is. So there's a ton of risk associated with unlawful gameplay. And if you kill a pirate, if you are in, if you're in the, Odin system and a pirate hasn't been able to update his imprint because he hasn't been back to Pyro or back to Null in some time, they're not going to be able to come back after you anytime soon. Unless they are flying around in a ship with a tier 1 bed, aka, or there's a pirate with an Apollo or an Endeavor nearby, they're going to be up a creek without a paddle. So, the piracy is hard mode. It is designed to be hard mode. And I really think you're going to have more to worry about from NPC pirates in SC, which is a PvE game with PvP in it, than you will player pirates, just because player pirating will be very difficult, and player pirates won't want to stray too far away from systems like Null, like Pyro, like where is it? Like Cathcart, where they have their their base of operations, because there are pirate havens there. So let's finish Crossroads real quick. Kren retrieved his Bakor and gave the hunter one last look. He knew Jorg would be back. One of the benefits of the lawful life was an easier time regenerating. Well, easier in that you wouldn't be arrested right when you woke up. The headaches were the same no matter what. Kren caught himself hoping Jorg's regeneration was painless and stopped mid-thought, surprised by his own sentimentality. In the distance, he saw his crew flying low over the scrapyard, likely looking for any sign of him or his ship. He wasn't looking forward to all the flack he'd catch for his current state, but he looked at Jorg's Avenger. He could at least avoid the worst of the grief by returning with a new ship. Jorg would be angry when he learned it was gone, but Kren told himself that even though the hunter wasn't a convert yet, it was never too soon to make a small donation to the cause. So it'll be really interesting to see if this actually becomes serialized fiction. When are we, are we going to get the next episode in this story about the rivalry, the standoff between Kren and what's his name? Jorg. This is, I think that this is going to be a really interesting story to follow between Kren and Jorg. How are they going to, what's their next meetup going to be like? Where are they going to meet? What are the circumstances going to be? Are they going to be able to, are they going to be in a dogfight? Is Jorg going to come back with reinforcements and, going to be like a boarding action? What's going to go on? The potentials for storytelling for this are really interesting. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how now that they both know that each is Tavaran and they're on either side of this Tavaran dichotomy that we have going on in the verse, that's already, it's been illustrated prior to this point. Paul has talked about it numerous times on Astro Historian and Astropub, and there's lots of good reading to support it. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what Jeremy does with this story and where he goes with it, because this is we haven't had serialized fiction in a while, and this is a really great entry into that aspect of the lore. So I can't wait for more. I'm hoping he already has it going on, because I am really eager to see where this goes and how many episodes we get out of it. But I have been streaming for almost 3 hours now, with the Galactopedia update and Crossroads, so I am going to call it a night. Again, I just want to thank you if you're still listening and hanging out with me in chat. I really appreciate you being here and hanging out with me. This is always fun for me. I do this because it's a fun hobby. Blizzrad, thank you, sir. Blizzrad, one of my mods. Blizzrad, thank you for the sub as well. It gets us closer to our goal of having enough subscribers and other monetization, so that way I can make my first donation to stackup.org. And remember, the sooner we get to enough monetization that I can do the cash out at $50, I will donate that, and I will match it with $50 of my own money towards stackup.org. So if you want to support my content and not watch commercials while also supporting a good cause, that's one way to go about it. If you're not a member of my Discord, I encourage you to join. We talk about this kind of stuff all the time. You'll get event notifications for when I'm going to be streaming or posting videos and doing other things. There's lots of good resources in there, and it's a great way to interact with not only myself but the other hosts of the Pathfinders podcasts, Nazarus and Armchair Admirals and Generals, being Atira Kell and Nightcob. But yeah, that's all I have for tonight. Please join me on Monday for Pathfinders podcast, and I will see you guys all later. I hope you found this fun and informative, and have a good night. And as Bill and Ted always say, be excellent to one another. Bye now.